Hello. Back on March 22nd, 2020, I recorded some reflections of what it was like to live through the 2020 coronavirus pandemic. Now, it was pretty long, so I split it into two parts, and now I'm finally publishing the second part. And even though I recorded it about a month ago, I'm still going to post it here as sort of a time capsule. So I'll play that part now, and I'll be back briefly at the end. So, what does it feel like? That was a timeline. Let me just explain a little bit of what it's like. So let me compare this to September 11th. On September 11th, I live on the West Coast, and I woke up, and this is probably the first thing that I had heard through the internet, or that we at the house had heard a news report first through the internet. My housemate at the time, Dan, told me, hey, you know, there's an attack that happened, or I forget exactly what he said, but we ended up turning on the TV. But because we're on the West Coast, actually everything had already happened by the time we turned on the TV. And so it kind of felt like this instantaneous things, like both of the towers had already fallen by that time. I think it was like 7-something a.m. on the East Coast, or no, 7-something a.m. on the West Coast. And that's a little bit different than what is happening here. It feels like it's sort of spread out over the course of several days, several weeks, that we're sort of learning more and more things. We're still not sure what's happening. I explained this feeling to somebody like a car wreck. You know, if you're in the middle of a car wreck, like time slows down, and for that moment, those few seconds, it seems like it takes forever. Now, I've never been in that situation, but that's how people have explained it to me. But in that moment, as you see a car coming towards you, you don't know if it's going to miss or if it's going to hit you, and if it's just going to be a little scrape or a bumper, or maybe it's going to be like a bad accident, or maybe it's like 2 seconds till the end of your life. Maybe that's a little bit dramatic, but you know what I mean? Like, it feels like we're in that moment, like we see the car coming and we know that it's going to be bad, but we don't know how bad. And that's different than September 11th. Like, everything happened all at once and then it was over, and nothing has happened since then. Okay, so like September 11th, I think that this will be the beginning of some changes. Some things will go back to normal and some things might not. So what changed on September 11th? Well, I remember that you used to be able to you could park at the airport and then go into the gates and wait for your friend arriving at the jetway, and you'd see them walking down the jetway after the plane pulled up. And that's one thing you can't do anymore. In fact, I remember my college roommates, this is a long time ago, describing how his parents or his family or somebody had just met him at the curb after he got off the plane. And I thought, really? Somebody would do that? Of course, that's normal now, but back then, I guess flying was so rare to me that whenever anybody flew, it was this whole big production. We'd take them to the gate and see them off, or if they were arriving, we'd be waiting there at the gate when they came off the plane. So that's an example of something that's different, that hasn't gone back and probably never will. And it's hard to tell what kinds of things might be different here in this situation. Maybe nothing, or maybe everything. Maybe sometime, maybe things will go back to normal. But I do worry that there's certain restrictions may be in place about large crowds, or that it takes many years for the airline industry to recover. So we were actually living in a historically cheap moment, like about buying plane tickets. I even made this whole video about how you can get really cheap plane tickets to go places. So I think that might not be true for that much longer anymore. Okay, I have one quick story about this. Shortly after September 11th, I don't know if it was a couple months or maybe a year, I went to go meet some friends at the airport, and I thought, I'm going to print out a fake boarding pass so I can get past TSA and go meet them at the gate, and I did. This was the days before TSA would scan your boarding pass. They just looked at it. So I printed out a convincing looking one, packed a little bag that made it look like I was traveling, and went to the gate and met them. And they said, wait, were you traveling too? How'd you get in here? And I'm like, shh, don't say anything, and waited until I got in the car to explain it. Maybe I shouldn't tell that story. Well, I think the statute of limitations has probably run out. I won't even say which airport that was or when that was, but anyway, that was the last time I ever met somebody at the gate. It was probably September. Oh, I'm not going to say the date. I don't know when it was. Okay, but in general, it's hard to know the future. Who knows what's going to happen? And one question people will ask is this all overreacting? And I think it's a little bit like buying insurance. If you buy insurance and you don't use it, then you think later, man, maybe I bought too much insurance. But if you buy insurance and you use it, then you're glad you did. And in some cases, we might not ever know if it was worth it to quarantine ourselves and do all of this stuff just to stop a pandemic from happening. So who knows what the eventual fallout will be and how many lives will be saved by doing this. At this point, though, it does seem like really expensive insurance. I'm like, wow, this is a lot of cost that comes with it, especially the stock market. I'll talk about that in a minute. So that's what it feels like now in this weekend, right in the middle of this. It's hard to tell what the norm will be. And by the way, this kind of is the norm in the rest of the world. So, for example, in Africa, I read this quote. Somebody said, we cannot barricade ourselves like developed countries. We cannot, for example, close the big market. So a lot of people in the developing world kind of live day to day like that, and they face these kind of fears of the future all the time. So it's nothing new in world history. It's just sort of new for us here in Southern California in this moment. Okay, so next I want to talk about finances, because not too many of us are worried about getting sick or worried about running out of food, but more the long-term financial health of the country or my state, or people are worried about my employer, and many people have already lost their jobs. And so those kinds of worries, I think, are what most people are thinking about. It's a little bit like the stock market. I'm going to look at this chart here. The markets are closed for this weekend, and if you look at this chart, it's hard to tell what's really going to happen next. If you look at that yellow line, you can't tell if it's the bottom or going back up or just the beginning of going back down farther. And actually, this chart is from a month ago. It wasn't the bottom. Look at this. This is a chart that shows the difference between the other bear markets in 1929 and 1987. And at this point, we've gone down faster than both of those. So in the 1929 stock market crash, it started the Great Depression, and the stock market bottomed out in 1932, having lost 90% of its value or something like that. And it did not fully recover that same number, according to some measures, until 1954, so several decades later. All right, now I know you're not supposed to look at your retirement savings in times like this, but my retirement savings peaked around 40 days ago. Let's call that 100%, or just for sake of illustration, let's say that's $1,000 40 days ago, February 11th or 12th, something like that. So 10 days ago, that had gone down to $870, and then 2 days ago, Friday, that's down to $707. So it's about 30% loss from 40 days ago or so. So we'll see what happens. The stock market is opening on Monday in a couple hours. But again, it's not all about the money. But let me read one more pessimistic thing, and then I'll talk about why I'm hopeful and what is good about all of this. So yesterday I read in The Atlantic an article called "This is Not a Recession, This is an Ice Age" by Annie Lowry, and she says this, but we're in a recession and everyone knows it. And what we're experiencing is so much more than that: a black swan, a financial war, a plague. It's an interesting term, black swan, something that nobody has ever experienced before. And I think it's probably true that the markets and global finances of the whole world hasn't gone down all at once in quite the same way ever before. So she says we don't know yet what the unemployment numbers are, but anecdotes, they show an economy not in a downturn or a contraction or a soft patch, not experiencing losses or selling off or correcting. They show evaporation, disappearance on what feels like a religious scale. That's an interesting point of view. How long will it take before restaurants are the same, before the airline industry recovers? And I don't know. So that's why I'm making this video now. In the middle of it, either I'll look back and say, yep, that was the middle of it, and things got better after that, and I was, there wasn't any reason to worry. Or I might just say, well, wow, March 22nd, that was just the beginning while we still had electricity and internet. Okay, that's a little bit much. I don't think that that's happening. Let me give some perspective on the bright side of things. So first of all, I read this article, Love in the Time of Coronavirus, by Andy Crouch. He says we need to redirect social energy from anxiety and panic to love and preparation. This crisis presents an extraordinary opportunity to fortify small communities of love and care for our neighbors. And I think that's the real purpose of this quarantine. That's one way to look at it. Like, we're not hiding away to protect ourselves, but we're doing it out of fear, but we're doing it out of love to help the community so that this virus doesn't spread as quickly, hopefully, and that more lives will be saved. And of course, it's never going to be possible to know if it worked or how much it worked or how things would have been different if we had done things differently. But this is what we're doing to try and help out. Finally, I like this question that I heard online somewhere. Somebody said, and they said, what is it that God can teach you in these circumstances that you couldn't learn otherwise? Or maybe the secular version is, what could you learn in this situation that you might not be able to learn in other situations or other circumstances? And I think that's an interesting thing to think about. What is it that is different? Like, we can take advantage of these situations, take advantage of this moment in history to kind of think through some things. And that's a good thing, a good perspective to have, I think. And ultimately, if you have an eternal perspective, the trials and tribulations of this earth are nothing to be compared with the eternal rewards that will come. And so I think that's a better perspective to take, especially in trying times like this. And so I don't know what the secular version of that is, but that's what I would encourage people to do, to not worry too much. Humanity has been through things like this and much worse before. It may be bad, it may be good, it may not be that big of a deal, but there you go. I know this was kind of long and rambly. Maybe I'll give an update in a week or two, but there it is. That is the perspective of what it's like on March 22nd, 2020, in the middle of California during the 2020 coronavirus pandemic. All right, take it easy. Talk to you later, hopefully. Wow, so yes, that was kind of long and rambly. Now it's the middle of April 2020, and as I'm watching that again, I'd say generally I feel more optimistic than I did back then. And I had no way of knowing this at the time, but it turns out that I was recording the day before the bottom of the stock market in March. And it's gone up more than 25% since then, as of April 2020. I think I'll eventually want to do a part 3 to talk about another update, but I'll leave that for another video. All right, thanks for watching. Please subscribe, and I'll see you later.